All right. I've been looking forward to this sit down, just you, me, and camera therapy. What's up, Team KVA? One Tech Traveler here. Hope you're enjoying the summer vibes, hydrating yourself in this cool weather, and applying that sun cream, SPF 50 if you are heading out to the beach, hiking, or going on your adventures. Now, today's video is a casual one. It's a dilemma that I'm currently trying to figure out, and I wanted to reach out to my KVA community. Hopefully, my dilemma will be more decisive after this video, and I'm looking forward to hearing your input. So make sure you do leave your suggestions, your advice, your tips down below of how I want to upgrade my camera body and lens, potentially. I needed that. Let's get started. So let me just give you a quick rundown of the equipment that I'm using. It's not a big list, don't worry. So the camera that I'm using right now is a Sony a7 III, which I bought when I was traveling in Japan, and it's coming up to about 4 years, something like that. It's served me pretty well. I've got that paired with the 35mm f1.4 Zeiss lens, which has been a nice in between, a good focal length that isn't too punched in, isn't too wide. So I have enough to work with, both as a hybrid shooter, photography, and leaning more into videography as well. Autofocus could be better, but when you do nail that shot or everything is in point, then it's pretty tack sharp. A little bit on the heavier side, and yeah, I've had it for a number of years, and there's been a crazy amount of lenses that have been released since, but as what I've used now, it's worked well in between. I do have the 90mm macro G lens from Sony, f2.8. That has worked well in situations I need extra focal length and a bit more punchiness, something more portraiture, telephoto, and just when distance isn't always an option. 90 is a decent length, but I would probably look to extend that further for extra reach versus the 35. Not too much of a distance there, but yeah, it's worked well as a macro, portraiture, and telephoto lens. That is currently my system. That's it. I've just got 2 lenses and the one body. Pretty much just working within my financial means, and then invested as best as I could with the budget that I had at that time. I'm basically looking to increase the amount of lenses that I currently have and potentially a new camera body if it kind of makes sense. Looking to just cover a wider focal length and coverage for the work that I do, and that is as a hybrid shooter, both in photography and videography. So it gives you an idea that I'm looking to be as strong as possible on both sides, and that could be zooms, that could be primes, it could be a combination. And the camera body, it could look to replace my Sony a7 III, or it could be a secondary backup, which could also make sense, but whether it makes sense at this point in time or later will be down for discussion. But that's the bottom line. Whew. Now that that's out of the way, let's talk camera lens. When I was out in Le Castellet in the French Formula 1 Grand Prix, really nice down there. That race was really exciting, very dramatic, and yeah, a lot of good stuff going on, and that being my first Grand Prix. Yeah, pretty epic experience. But that also showed like how zoom lenses are just like really important, not something where I'm focused a lot on really zoomed in on the cars. It's more of the atmosphere, experiential hospitality with the guests enjoying themselves in the paddock club, in the paddock, over the pit lane, the truck tours. I was able to try the 2470 Sony GM first generation, the Sigma 2470 f2.8 art lens as well, and the first and the second generation of the 7200 f2.8 Sony glass. Paired with my a7 III, even though it's not got the most sophisticated or the best autofocus system compared to the A7R, the A7 IV, even the A7S III. Just using those glasses, I found them so much more snappier, more responsive, and more accurate with the kind of shots that I wanted, and the intelligence. I was getting a lot more shots that were in focus, and just those focal lens 2470 7200 was just like a great one. Those are 2 lenses, pretty heavy, but the 7200 great for just the extra distance and giving me extra to work with. And then the 2470 just being a great staple zoom lens across the wide, and then reaching into the telephoto range. So not having to switch to the primes all the time. F2.8 is my preference. I was considering the F4s of the 24-105 as a one lens. even the 7200, more than half the price of the second generation f2.8. The f2.8 would be my preference from that. For other people, f4 might suffice depending on the work that you do. I do like those a lot. Photography, the weight won't be an issue. When it comes to video, 2470, of course, you can get away with the new generation gimbals. That lens does come out. It's not an internal zoom where the hardware is not moving itself. So for balancing on a gimbal, there might be a few tweaks here and there. There are some pros and some cons. 7200, I think you could put it on the gimbal. Whether you'd want to, I don't know. We'll see. But handheld, yeah, worked well. And for photography, for video, those areas I would really like to get access to it and add it into my lens as something that I see myself doing more of. But then it's also looking on the wider aspect. So those zoom options would be great. There's other prime options we could look at. So whether it's the 50 f1.2, could be the 1635 f2.8 GM for the wider side, even the 20mm f1.8 that I've heard really good things about, and something that I'm quite inclined to get because it will make the overall rig a lot lighter for vlogging, for documenting a nice wide angle lens for establishment shots, traveling. We got zooms, we got primes. Which side are you leaning more towards so far in the discussion? Let me know it down in the comments. So those are currently where my thoughts are. I like 2470, 7200, it's just a staple and gives you really all-round coverage for many situations, which would help with me. But of course, that ends up being the most expensive option, especially if we look at the second generation of those two lenses. That's easily close to £5,000, just those two lenses alone. There are alternatives, like I mentioned, the Sigma 2470. I really enjoyed using that lens too. Autofocus was good as well. It's lighter than the first generation of Sony's 2470, half the cost of the original and the second gen. So price-wise, a lot more affordable. Only reason that would make me stay away from it, especially I like to travel and be in nature where you got more likelihood of kicking up any sort of dust and being caught out in the rain, is it's not weather sealant. And for a lens that I'd want for a couple of years, even though I'm sure that can last for a couple of years, just being weather sealed gives me a bit more peace of mind. So if you got the Sigma 2470, share your experience down below. I'd love to hear it. Besides the 20 f1.8, it's still fairly pricey, but I've heard really good things about it, and that one looked really good. That's just as a light lens, super compact, easy to vlog with. And yeah, I like the aperture, the autofocus. So because it's very light and easy to work with, I don't mind adding that as a prime from the other heavier lenses. Things I like about primes: generally get better access to wider apertures. f1.8, f1.4 pricing is fairly reasonable, but with primes it becomes more of having to choose the right focal length that is going to hit the spots that I need in certain situations, because you don't have that zoom range to work with. Seeing the 135 f1.8 GM, that one looks really good. The 50mm f1.2 G Master looked great, silky, smooth and creamy, and more of a nice portrait lens. And a 1635 f2.8 could also work well. So those are pretty much camera lenses that I'm thinking. There's no right or wrong answer. It's just really putting everything on the table and seeing what that's going to look like. There's a lot of good lenses out there that don't necessarily have to be G Master, so if I've missed anything, then let me know. I mentioned camera bodies, either looking to replace or be a secondary backup to my A7 III, or probably relegating that to the secondary. The reason being is the port on my A7 III has been damaged. It doesn't work anymore, which honestly sucks, because it just removes any kind of external video recording and costs an arm and leg to repair. So I'd rather go back to South Korea when I actually had my A7 III fixed from water damage in Thailand. And that was just like far more reasonable. The service was a lot better, comprehensive and thorough in their checking, and replaced a lot of the bits. And actually the headphone jack was working, but it's failed again. So everything else on my camera works well, but that really does hamper me on the video side, which is why I'm thinking if I have another camera body, and it's not just because of the headphone jack, but the A7 IV, for example, just being a lot more upgraded, primarily having 10-bit 422 recording in 4K 60 frames per second, no crop, quality of life improvements, such as the articulating screen that I can have viewable while I'm recording. The camera bodies that I'm looking at is the Sony A7 IV, they're all Sonys, so I'll get that out of the way. The A7 IV, the A7S III, and the A7R IV-A. Now, I'll probably discount the Sony A7R IV-A. I liked it initially for the higher resolution. On the photography side, I do like to print, so having more of that resolution just gives a bit more detail to capture, even though it potentially could introduce more noise depending. But not as strong on video, which is where I'm trying to focus on, so it doesn't necessarily improve much more on that side from my A7 III that I would like to have. Plus, I think I've seen there's just no middle ground in terms of compression for those files, so they will get crazy big. I think I saw it was like up to 130 megabits uncompressed, and even the smaller size JPEGs are still like 40 or something. So I think just that, and having to make sure you've got big memory cards, fast memory cards, I think it just doesn't really fit with what I'm looking for. So I did initially consider it for photography, but yeah, for videography, it kind of discounted itself. So that pretty much leaves the Sony A7 IV and the A7S III. Now, the A7S III will just give me far more video to work with, and I like that a lot. I think it's low light sensitivity, is 4K 10-bit 422 recording, but also having that up to 120 frames per second, I believe, with no crop. It feels a lot more powerful, and you still have the same articulating display where the 7 IV ported it over from. But while megapixels don't really matter too much, on the photography side, if I'm looking more on a hybrid sort of shooting with one body, then that's when it kind of weakens a little bit on the photo side. That being said, I still do have the A7 III, and pairing wise, it could work well. A7 III body for photos, A7S III for video. So that can definitely work, and I like the idea of it. The only thing is the A7 III and just the menu system not being touchscreen to operate, like there's just some usability differences that might be a bit jarring working with one and the other. So that's where that pairing can also be a little bit awkward. If you use both of them, let me know, but I probably feel like I'd want to use the A7S III more because the menu system works well. You know, the A7 III, I've used it for years and I've made it into how I like to use it. But it would make me think, should I get the A7 IV instead? And also the A7S III, as much as I would like it, is still a very expensive body, more than £1,000 difference between that and the A7 IV. I could primarily spend on lenses, which I would probably prioritize over the body. So yeah, for the camera body wise, it's really just being able to unlock a few more efficiencies, but it's not the most important because I definitely just want to get better glass and increase my glass range to work with. But the A7 IV, I guess it would make the most sense as a hybrid shooter and being very similar to the A7 III or an upgrade. The A7 IV, I've heard they've improved the color science and can mimic a lot more closer to the A7S III. It also has the Cinetone profile, unlocks 4K 10-bit 422 compared to the A7 III 8-bit. Just a lot of the usability options on the A7 IV I like a lot. They did increase the pixels as well from 24 to roughly 33, which I think is a great sweet spot for oversampling 4K, for additional cropping and retaining more detail. I like that a lot too. It's still roughly £2,400 compared to the £3,600 of the A7S III. But again, that will kind of already cover one of the top glass lenses or two lenses if I wanted to. So a few things to consider there, but that's pretty much it. Those are where my thoughts are. What do you think with the camera lens selection? Should I go prime? Should I go zoom? Should I have a combination? Should I focus more on the focal lengths, or should I mix it up and maybe get one prime for the wide and then go on a zoom for the main focal lengths? Or should I just go all primes? Do you think I should just invest it all in the glass? You think I should get probably one body in that allows me to get one glass and potentially give me 2 cameras to work with, either one for video, one for photo, or just having 2 bodies to work as a secondary, or have different lenses attached to them for quick workflow? What do you think? Let me know. Sound off in the comments, but I appreciate it if you've stuck around. Thanks a lot, Team KBA. I hope you enjoyed this, and I look forward to doing more of these therapy sessions with you soon. I'll see you in the next video, but until then, keep being awesome. Peace. That was like so much talking. Time to take a nap.